program. I'd also like to thank, in addition to Dr. Panina Moore and Leora Tannenbaum and Dina Selter and Sarah Naor and the Sharsheret team. I'd like to also thank Dr. Sharon Grossman for joining us both last week and this week, Be'ezrat Hashem, and this week to also thank Rav Ari Natanel Moore and Dr. Panina Moore's son, who will be joining us for the dominant part of our shiur this week, which will focus on halachic implications of BRCA. We heard from Dr. Sharon Grossman last week, and we will hear different aspects of breast cancer and many of the halachic concerns this week. I'd also like to mention that, albeit this is the final event of the Sharsheret as part of the initiation of the Women's Torah Leadership Forum, Be'ezrat Hashem, we will have more programming, so stay tuned to hear all about that. And we will also have a very special presentation this evening by Leora, who will tell us, as community leaders, how we as leaders can bring Sharsheret into our communities. Without further ado, Tina Selter.
Thank you, Rabbanit Chani, and thank you everyone for joining us for the final session for Rabbaniyot and Women Community Leaders. All three sessions are part of the Florence and Joseph Appelman Lecture Series. I'd like to just review a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webinar is being recorded. Participant faces and names will not be in the recording. You may have noticed that you were muted. We ask that you remain muted throughout the session. And we'll hold a Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. I want to remind you that Sharsheret is a national not-for-profit cancer support and education organization and does not provide any medical advice or perform any medical procedures. The information provided by Sharsheret and tonight's speakers is not a substitute for medical advice or treatment for specific medical conditions. You should not use this information to diagnose or treat a health problem. If you have any questions that are specific to your medical care, always seek the advice of your physician or qualified healthcare provider. Below is our Sharsheret Israel website and our contact information.
Okay, good evening. It's Panina again here. I'm just going to give you, hold on, I'm going to share my screen. If I could find it. Just one second. Something going on with my sharing.
Excellent. While you're looking, I also just want to wish everyone, I think this is very timely that tonight is, as we know, Yom Kippur Katan, as we celebrate tomorrow night, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, Me HaChoshech El HaOr, and with that opening, perfect. We can now hear from phenomenal Dr.
There we go.
Panina.
Okay, I just wanted to, just two slides basically explaining. I don't know if some of you have seen in the, there was a lot of publicity about malfunctioning of the BRCA testing and something that came out from the States about hormone replacement therapy. So first of all, if anybody read about it, the idea was that, I don't know if you read or you didn't read about it, but there was a mistake in one of the kits. There was a faulty kit in the genetic testing that was used for population screening that I spoke about last week and the week before. And the health ministry decided to go and to really go into depth and to test it. Now, this kit was only used between August 2024 and January 2025. And as they investigated into it, and they found that actually there were only 2 women that received incorrect results, meaning they were told that they were not carriers when they were carriers. And they did a thorough investigation, and no one else was affected by it. That kit is not in use anymore. Now they have a different kit. It's not it was the BRCA nanochip kit number 14. Now they're using nanochip test 16. And no one has to worry about it. Even if you were tested during that time period, they went through everything, and whoever was found, they checked everyone. So there's no fear about it. There was only 2 women that there was a mistake with it. The other thing that was very interesting that came out was they called it the black box, safety warning to be removed from hormone therapy for menopause. Years ago, many years ago, when they did the woman's study, there was a lot coming out against hormones and hormone replacement therapy, and the amount of women that had used hormone replacement therapy dropped, like it says, more than 70%, because they were afraid that it was causing all kinds of symptoms, as including breast cancer. So for years, they stopped. This is from, I think, before 2003. Many doctors will not recommend it. And on the pamphlet that comes with any kind of hormones, there was like the blurb that says, you beware of breast cancer, it can cause breast cancer, and cautions about it. This last week, they came out saying that they're dropping that black box. And today, it's, as I told you during the presentations, hormone replacement therapy is safe. It does not raise your I can't even talk straight tonight. I'm sorry. It does not raise your risks for breast cancer more than you have if you're a BRCA carrier, or BCLA for the general population. So with that, I will stop share. And it is my kavod. It's kavod for me to introduce my son, Rav Ari Netanel Mor, he's the Rav of the new Kehila in Neve Shamir and Beit Shemesh called Haminyan Shelanu. He's a Motz, he's a Moret Tzedek in Beit Torah, Mechubarim LeTorah. He's Miroshei Shivot Chedvata, Rosh Koilel Hechal Hora in Beitar. And he's Orech Limud Yomim V'Chot Daf Yomi, that if anybody wants, I'm publicizing it for you, Ari. You can join up and you will get every day. It's very interesting. Even I get it, and I sometimes even look at it.
Wow.
And it's my pleasure as his mother, and also from Sharsheret, to introduce him. And the floor is all yours. Bakasha, Ari.
Oh, wow. Thanks. After an introduction like that, Baruch Hashem, it's my honor to be here. And thanks to my mother. Everything that I know or do is because of her. So thank you again, Mami. So really this the whole when we talk about BRCA and regarding to halacha, there's a very basic and fundamental idea that we have to relate to. We all know regarding anything to do with halacha and refuah, anything to do with medicine, we're always leaning to see whether there's the issue of pikuach nefesh here or there's no pikuach nefesh, and according to that, we make a lot of decisions of what kind of treatment to do regarding Shabbos, regarding other issues, and so on and so forth. And when we're talking about BRCA, the big question is over here: is it actually falls under that category of pikuach nefesh? Because really, the main question should be, what's a big deal? It's a test. Let's get the test. If a lady knows that she's a carrier, so obviously there's a risk, and therefore she'll do whatever she has to do to take care of it. Why is there any even halachic debate over here? But there really is a great halachic debate because different from other testings, BRCA, since it's just a dominant gene and then a recessive gene, doesn't necessarily mean that a person will actually get sick. There are very high percentages and so on and so forth, but there's no clear and immediate present danger. And therefore, the question of whether to be tested or not to be tested, even though it's just a simple blood test and there's no issue here, but it can raise many other questions. Like, for example, what do you do as far as relationship within the family? Some women would say, listen, I'm a carrier. I don't want to pass this on to my siblings, to my children. So maybe I should not get pregnant anymore, or should I tell my kids, and they in turn will have to tell their spouses, and so on and so forth. It raises a lot of halacha questions, and we'll try to address whatever we can over here. So first of all, we have to really establish is it an issue of pikuach nefesh, and whether first of all, should we be tested in the first place? So a little, some slides over here with the Maramakomos, different Maramakomos regarding this issue. And really, the most important thing is once we realize that there is a chova, there is an obligation. If you do realize that there is an obligation to do it, to test yourself, that changes already everything else regarding braka. Because once there is a obligation, once you have to do it, that means that halachically it is in a situation where of pikuach nefesh. And when you have an issue of pikuach nefesh, so it changes all the laws regarding the issues of braka. So we'll start from the beginning just a second. I'm also having issues here with sharing. Okay, here we go. So we'll start from the beginning. The Avram Steinberg, who's a very known, he's a professor, doctor. Also, he wrote the Sefer Refuah Halacha. He refers and actually deals with everything. I'm not going to go into all the details, but he starts off saying straight away that there's no question that there's an obligation for an Ashkenazi lady who was 25 to 30 years old and has a family history that for sure has to be tested. It's actually an obligation, an halachic obligation, because there's an issue of pikuach nefesh over here. Even though might be 50% or more, or even 30%, that's already a reason to be tested, even though it invites many issues. And it makes no difference whether she's married or not. She should be taking the test if there is a real family history. Furthermore, if she's not at that age yet, but already married, so since it removes a lot of the halachic issues, once she's married, it is recommended. That's the words he would use. It is recommended to take the test even before the first child is born, if there is family history. That is regarding testing, proper testing. That's when you know that there is an issue in a family, and that creates an obligation, because a person has the obligation to take care of oneself, to make sure that you're medically fit to do whatever job HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you in your world. And therefore, since today medicine enables us to find that out, you have that obligation, and a person has to do that. Besides that, there's also a recommendation to do screening for a lady who's 25 and 30 years old, even if she's not married. And that we'll deal with that in a second a little more. And there are various opinions over here, and pros and cons whether to take the screening test for BRCA, and we'll try to get to that in a second. But first of all, it's important also to know, furthermore, it's not only just an obligation on the person itself, it's also an obligation on anybody who has the ability to influence others to know it, like Moshe Feinstein writes in the Tshuva that he talks about the test for Tay-Sachs, even though it's a little bit different. There's a recessive gene, but still the same logic applies. He writes straight out, it is important to advertise it through the media, through whatever way you can, wherever you have influence, to make sure people know about this testing and know about the obligation. So anybody who is in the position to influence other has an obligation to make sure people know about it. And actually, there are many people who have no idea what you're talking about. They heard about it. They generally know that something like that exists, but they really should know what the laws are. So again, if you have the ability, you should tell anyone who has a history family that they have an obligation to be tested. And if they're above the age of 25, 30, and or after they're married, and if they don't, screening is also an important thing to do. Why would we even think about not doing it? So first of all, obviously, the pros of screening for BRCA when there's no history family is, first of all, because it will enable, if you do find anything, we can find the right ways to deal with it. It also creates a situation where at least 50% of the women were not found out, even if they have a history family, because it wasn't so evident that's the reason why they suffered from cancer, whatever it is. So they didn't go to be tested, and therefore the family members don't know it. Certainly, also smaller families don't necessarily know about the family history, so screening will take care of that issue. And there are plenty of families, especially in the frum world, in the Haredi world, also who feel uncomfortable talking about it, and therefore people in the family don't know about it. So even though there is a very strong presence and a very strong family history, still they won't know. So only through screening will do that. And furthermore, part of the gene is passed through the father. And a lot of times people don't see the connection between the two. Therefore, screening will help you that even if there's no history family, there are plenty of ladies who still need, and according to research, about 50% that you could have found out through screening. So therefore, it is seems to be recommended. On the other hand, could be that it's not enough of a percentage to cause, so to speak, a scare. It's not a real scare, but a lady who has no history family, and suddenly we start finding out that there are more and more women. So a lot of people will get worried about it. And today there's the Dor Yesharim testing, where they test for genetic issues. So some people want to say, okay, let's test for that also, which is something that can cause tremendous issues, tremendous problems. People will find out that there are carriers, might start having anxiety and so on and so forth regarding it, even though it's not such a high percentage. Furthermore, it can cause discrimination in workplaces, in insurance, in acceptance to schools, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it wouldn't be recommended to do screening. Furthermore, also giving genetic counseling to to so many people is costs a lot of money and can cause a lot of people to really get anxiety and so on and so forth. And effectively, the question is if actually a lot of people will come to be tested, even if you're offering screening, especially in the frum community. So therefore, maybe it's better not to even start with it. But at the end result, halachically, most of the poskim agree that screening is kedai to do, providing you adhere to certain guidelines. Unlike Moshe Sternbuch writes in his Chuvas V'Hanhagas, that certainly for Ashkenazim, it is worth their while to take the test. He's talking about, again, Tazax, and you can make a distinction between the two. But at the end result, he agrees that if you're trying to save future sorrow and future problems, there's no question about it that a simple blood test, even though there are so many reasons not to do it, it is certainly recommended. It's not an obligation to do screening, but it is recommended. So again, since it's recommended for any woman to do it, it's also recommended for leaders within the community to actually tell people and inform them about this idea. Unlike Rav Steinberg at the end writes that the pikuach nefesh aspect and saving lives is way outweighs any other reasons you would have not to take the test. And therefore, even if there's no family history, still it is worthwhile to go ahead and recommended to do the screening. So if we summarize here, screening is recommended if a lady's above 25 and 30 years old. I have to add over here that even though he doesn't write it, but if you'll ask most Rabbanim, they'll say, wait until a lady's married, because otherwise it puts her into different issues that we'll be talking about in a second. So wait till you're married to do the screening, maybe even after a kid or two. But if there is a family history, so right after marriage, it's recommended, and there is an obligation actually to be tested once a lady is 25 or 30 years old. There's another issue over here, which arises because of being tested. Once a person is tested, and the lady knows that she has a chance to and she might get cancer. So there's not much you can do about it while you still want to have kids. But at a later stage, you might want to go through prophylactic surgery. And that has all kinds of halachic issues, whether you could or you cannot do it. So a person who actually is a carrier, halachically, most of the poskim say that it is not only you're allowed to, it's even recommended. The only one that came out a little bit against it is Rabasha Weiss, who says that his netias libi, that's the words he used, his heart leans towards saying that trust in Hashem and don't worry and everything will be fine. And even though a person's a carrier, there's nothing to worry about it. And he's even talking about a doctor, if a doctor should participate in such a thing and not. And he says, certainly that's his feeling, but halachically he says it is permitted. That's Rabasha Weiss. But most of the poskim hold differently. They hold, like we see over here from the Refuah of Halacha and Rav Zilberstein and other poskim, Rabbi Yashiv also has like that, that it is allowed, and not only allowed, you can even, I wouldn't say force, but you can certainly recommend very strongly and tell someone to go through the surgery because it's actually pikuach nefesh. The question is at what stage to do it, and that really depends on the person's life, and that's more of a psychological, medical issue, less a halachic issue. But obviously, we're only talking about after a lady's decided she doesn't want to have any more kids and so on and so forth, and has to be with an agreement with her husband, because since he has the obligation of pru or revu to have kids, you have to make sure that that obligation was fulfilled. So anyone who wants to go through surgery, preventive surgery, has to ask a Rav whether this is the right time or maybe wait out. It depends on the person's age and depends on family history and so on. A lady who says, still, I want to trust in Rachmei Shamayim and I want to have bitachon and so on and so forth, she has the right to choose that way, even though halachically you can tell her most poskim hold not like that, but she has who to lean on when it comes to that. Rabasha Weiss certainly held that way. And the bottom line, there is a obligation on the rabbi, on the doctor, on any leader to recommend treatments that save life, even if it's something that we don't see with our own eyes. Even though some will tell you that the Ibn Ezra, Rabbeinu B'chaya say that the only reshus, the only permission a doctor has to deal in medicine is only in illnesses that you can see with your eyes. So you'll say genetic issues and so on and so forth are not things that you can see and not things that are 100% going to happen. But still, since today we have the means to see it, the technological means to see it, it's considered as if we see it with our own eyes. Like the Tzanzer Rebbe, the previous Tzanzer Rebbe, the Rei Yatziv writes straight out. And Tzitz Eliezer also says more than that. Not only does the doctor have the obligation to try and cure a person, the patient too has an obligation to help the doctor and to cure himself. And that's part of Pikuach Nefesh, that's part of Hashavas Aveda. And even if it's not straight out now Pikuach Nefesh, but since it will lead to Pikuach Nefesh, that is enough for a person and to create an obligation for the doctor, for the leaders, whoever it is, to recommend, to encourage, to create a situation where people understand the risks and go ahead and take whatever can save them. So, and this is referring also to the testing we mentioned before, screening that's mentioned before, and whatever surgery or treatment the doctors recommend. Again, has to work within the community, within the family, within the way things work out. And a lot of times, women might find themselves in a situation where their husbands don't exactly understand what the danger over here, because they didn't go for consultation and so on and so forth. So it is very important for women also to bring their husbands to consultations like that and send them and make it a point. Go ask your rabbi, and obviously you should be a rabbi who understands the issues over here. Unfortunately, there's some rabbis who don't know exactly what it is, but ask and get a proper halachic view, because there is, again, an obligation to be tested and to treat, but just to do it in the right way and at the right time. Another issue that arises also is the question of tattooing in the case of surgery. And again, if that arises, certainly you can quote from Zilberstein in Refuah Kahalacha, says straight out, brings out the most opinions of the Rishonim and the Poskim, from the Rimi Lunil, who happens to be one of the Rishonim, all the way down to the Shut Mutzal Me'esh, that what the Torah forbidden in tattooing is only in a case where you're actually writing letters, creating words. But if you're just making, you're just drawing or putting ink on, there's no problem to do it midoraisa. It's only midrabanan in a situation where there is a psychological need or even a social need for this tattooing. It's allowed, so therefore that wouldn't be a reason not to do it. One of the main things that you come across, and this is a big issue, is what do you do once a lady finds out that she is a carrier? And let's say, first of all, the question would happen, what happens if she knows before she's going out, before she's at the age of shidduchim, she's looking for a chassan? What happens after you started going out? What happens when you're engaged? What do you do about your child? Do you tell your daughter? Don't you tell your daughter? And when your daughter knows about it, that you're a carrier, and she goes and she decides she wants to be tested, whether she should be tested at an early age, a later age, this really depends on a lot of things. So first of all, let's try to understand what the issues could be over here. So obviously, if someone, and like the Chafetz Chaim says straight out, there's no question about it, that if someone is ill and he has an illness that is not seen, it's something which is internal and nobody can tell, still there is an obligation for anybody who knows about it, for sure the patient or the ill person himself, but even a third party, to go ahead and tell any interested party, whether it's in shidduchim or whether it has to do with business, to inform them that this person is sick, but you have to make sure that there are at least these three conditions that happen. One is you have to make sure that it's actually something dangerous. Now, we established already that we're talking about a real danger over here. This is not just, something remote. This is something that you have to be tested. It's an obligation. You're allowed to do surgery, even though this type of surgery has a lot of big shilas halachically. You're allowed to even tattoo yourself because even though it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, so clearly it comes under the category of a real holy haguf. So for sure, that first condition applies over here. Secondly, which means you should not create and give over information where the party that listens, that you're trying to inform, misinterprets what you're saying. So a lot of times that happens when you inform someone, oh, that person has this and that. He has a genetic disformity. So some people say, oh, I don't want anything to do with that. But this is not the situation. This is a situation where there is a mutation in the gene that can cause whatever it is. You have to make sure to be very clear about what you're informing. And obviously, you have to see, you're not allowed to say it because you hate the person. That's very clear. We're not even talking about that. But also, you have to make sure that there's a proper to'eles from what you're saying. And this third condition is very, very important to understand really what the shala is. Because if you would come along and you would inform any shadchan, before the girl even goes out on the shidduch, you say, listen, she's a carrier. Should probably lose 90% of any suggestions, or maybe even 95% of any suggestions that she could have had. Now, people say, well, what do I need it for? And that's it. That would be the end of it. She wouldn't find a chassan ever. And the same thing, even if you say that a boy comes from a family that is a carrier, when it comes to shidduchim, people just say, I want to stay away, forget it. It's not for me. So therefore, you're causing tremendous damage if you're informing that. So first of all, as a third party, for sure you shouldn't do it. And even a girl who wants to be mishtadech and wants that shouldn't be on her resume. It shouldn't be on her resume saying, I'm a carrier. There's no question about it. But on the other hand, could be that there were people who would have known about this. They would not agree at all for this shidduch. And it could come to a situation of kiddushay toes, which means the condition could be nulled afterwards, because it could say, if we would have known, we wouldn't have done it in the first place. As an Isser, oh no, you're not allowed to lie, just like you're not allowed to sell something which is you're not to be honest about what you're selling. Same thing over here, and it causes later on questions of shlom bayis when people understand that things were hidden from them. So therefore, you do have to say eventually that you're a carrier. How would you do that? So first of all, you have to make sure there's no ben adam l'chaver, there's no ben adam l'makom, what the right thing would be. So it really depends. If someone is asking you straight out, is this girl a carrier? That means that these people really care whether it's true or not. You cannot say, listen, most people don't care, most people don't ask. If a person asks you straight out, you have to say. You have to say it. They want to know. And it means that it makes a difference to them. They'll make their own considerations, whether they're interested or not interested. But if they're asking if a girl's a carrier and you know she is, you have to say she is. If you don't know, but there's a history family, you don't have to say she's a carrier. You don't have to say there's an history, a family history. That's something that if they ask you, is there a family history? Again, it means they care about it. You have to answer, but otherwise they don't. Most people don't even ask this question. Do they? They just ask, is there any health issues? This is not considered a health issue that you say at the beginning when people are asking about it. So before a girl goes out, before the shidduch starts, this is not something to inform anyone unless you're asked pointedly whether she's a carrier or whether there's a history family. When they're not asking that, so when do you say? Eventually, you have to say it because there's between 35 to 75%. That's already a reason to say, but therefore, you shouldn't be doing it and shouldn't say it beforehand because that will prevent, like I said before, that would prevent this girl of ever finding a shidduch. So the right time to do it is after they started going out, the first, the second time. Depends really on what kind of crowd it is. Some people go out 20 dates and some people go out 5 dates. So after things become a little bit not serious, where persons will feel like he was tricked and he can't back out, but when things warm up, so to speak, it could be second, third, or whatever date, depends on the situation. That is the time to go ahead and say, listen, I want to tell you something. I'm a carrier, and explain what it means. And I can't say what my experience is because I've seen all kinds of things regarding not only BRCA, but other things also, where some people, since they don't really understand what it is, say, oh, it's going to be okay. Others say, no, we believe in we have bitachon. And others say, oh, okay, since we're not involved emotionally enough yet, we're not interested anymore. But that's not your consideration. Your consideration is, since you have an obligation to say, you should say it once things become a little bit serious. And obviously also, if you think the other person cannot keep a secret and that he might go ahead and say it to other people, you don't have the obligation to say it. But on the other hand, you cannot continue. And I was just exposed now to a story like that. That's why I'm bringing it up now. That someone who actually, that was the situation. They went through. They started off and they went out. And on the third date, the girl wanted to tell the boy about her situation, but she realized he's not, him and his family are not people who are able to keep their mouth shut. So she just didn't tell him anything. She just broke it up because she has an obligation to say, but she doesn't want to say it might harm her. In a situation like that, that is the right thing to do. Obviously, she has to shell and everything else, but that's what she should do. That is when it comes to shidduchim. I would go a little further and say that once a person's already engaged, let's say you did not inform, and a girl's already engaged, there for sure there is a real obligation, and a person has a right to break off the engagement if he wasn't told or she wasn't told beforehand, because this is something which, first of all, is a breach of trust, and secondly, this is something that even though could be, and it makes a lot of sense that nothing's ever going to happen, and even if yes, it can be treated easily, so to speak, but at the end result, this is something, it is so that's why it's so important to say ahead of time. As I was mentioned before, that also affects when to be tested. If a girl is tested at the age of shidduchim before she starts going out, that will create an obligation for her to inform whoever she's going out with. Why would you want to create such a situation for yourself? Therefore, it's better to wait with the testing until a person is actually married. Then it's too late, so to speak, and that's the time. And you don't really have an obligation to be, even if there's a family history, you don't have an obligation to be tested in order to tell someone else. You have an obligation to be tested in order to save yourself further down the line. As you get older, most people will not get sick. Even if they do, will be at a later age. Therefore, this obligation does not obligate you to be tested in order to inform other people. It just obligates you to be tested when it becomes relevant. And that means after you're married. Some Rabbanim, when you ask them, will also even say, don't get tested until you have at least a boy and a girl. Because otherwise it puts you under stress. It puts you into a situation that you start thinking about, maybe I should have kids, maybe I should go through surgery, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. Once you have a boy and a girl, you're finished. And you finish Puruvu, then okay, then you can think about it. Some people say, a boy and a girl, you can have 8 boys and 1 girl, 8 girls and 1 boy. It could take years to do it. So maybe not a boy and a girl, maybe after 2 kids. So that really depends on a person's relationship with their husband, a person's relationship within the community, and how much bitachon they have in Hashem, and how much they know themselves, whether they'll be stressed, they'll be with anxiety, and so on and so forth. It really a lot depends on that. So therefore, to say straight out what the right recommendation would be, I think would be halachically you can't even say, but certainly it should be after a person is married. If someone unfortunately is not married and is already 25 or 30 years old, then it is, again, like we said before, there's even no obligation to be tested. But if a person says, listen, if I'm being tested, it might ruin my ability to find the right shidduch. So again, you have the right to weigh with that after consulting with a rabbi. That's why it's very important, this idea when regarding shidduchim, when you're tested, what you're tested for. Therefore, for sure, screening is not recommended at all because you have no reason even to be tested until a person is already married and has maybe a kid or two, or maybe even more than that. A lot of people say, you know what, I'll be tested, and you know, I don't have to say anything to the shidduch, because even if something happens, a person can have kids and can have everything go through PGT, and that's also another question. Whether let's say a lady finds out she's a carrier and she says, I'm worried, I want to pass this on to the next generation. I want it to end here. So is she allowed to go through PGT in order to prevent this from continuing within the family? And the answer is that really the Fulka Lachar Steinberg says that when there's certainly a recessive gene or a real problematic hereditary genetic issue, then there's no question about it that it's allowed. Because otherwise there's 100% rate of mortality, even 80% rate of mortality, like in Huntington and things like that. That's enough already for a person to go through PGT. Even there are a lot of halachic shilas regarding that. It has to be done, obviously, with halachic supervision and so on and so forth. But there is certainly you're allowed to do. When it comes to BRCA, it's different. There, he brings various opinions and says that most poskim would hold that it is not allowed, because the time when a person can get ill is when it's 30% and in an older age, and there's a way of finding out and taking care of it, and medicine might change in the future, and you're really doing it in order for your kids to be safe. In a situation like that, you can certainly rely upon that and trust Rachma Shamayim. Therefore, you should not do PGD. They used to call it PGD, or today it's called PGT, whatever, it's the same thing. But he does bring up that someone who really is worried, and we know the Yiddish mamas who are really worried about their girls, and they feel it's too much for them. It might even ruin their will to build a big family and so on and so forth. And they know that there's a strong presence in their family, and there's plenty of family members who are carriers or were sick. In a situation like that, there is a possibility, obviously after speaking to a rabbi and speaking to the right professionals, to go through PGT to make sure that you have only embryos that will not don't have the BRCA gene, the mutation in the BRCA gene. So today it seems, some people say, oh, this technology is amazing. Today you can decide already the eye color and all these genetic issues. It's behind us. It's not behind us because halachically, right now, this is not something that you're allowed to do. Someone who is anyway going through IVF, so there it's already a different story. There since she's anyway going through IVF, so she can do the PGD in order to make sure that she has healthy embryos and doesn't have a problem. So if we summarize halachically everything we've seen until now. So first of all, regarding testing is recommended to any Ashkenazi lady who has family history to test for BRCA, no question about it, to do it after she is married. Furthermore, there's an obligation, halachic obligation of pikuach nefesh, of an ishmartem od nafshasechem. That obligation is what allows us to be Mechalel Shabbos. It's what allows us to feed people on Yom Kippur. That same obligation applies to someone who has a family history and is above the age of 30 to go ahead and test themselves, regardless of what, if they're married or not married or whatever it is. A person has an obligation to do that. Furthermore, it's recommended not very recommended, but it is recommended for any Ashkenazi lady at around the age of 25 and 30 and married, even if she has no history of family, but she's married already. And I would say even if she has a kid or two, to go ahead and to go through genetic screening, if possible. And if we speak about not the women themselves, we talk about the rabbis or the public figures or women of influence within the communities. They have an obligation to present this to the women in the community. They have the obligation to talk about it, to encourage women, to have the right answers, to learn about it, because most women that come have no idea. A lot are scared even from what they've heard. And if they don't have like the different clinics, like one of the clinics my mother had, they might find themselves in a situation where they're facing something which is very, very scary. And it's your job, halachically, I'm not talking about now in any, not in ethical or medical way, halachically, to give them that support in order to fulfill their obligation to of nishmartem l'nafshosechem. It is certainly not recommended to do screening before marriage. And furthermore, I would say someone who is not of age, not 25 or 30 years old, it is not recommended, even if there's a family history, to do a test before you're married. It causes a lot of issues. Once you're 30, it's a different story. Furthermore, it is recommended also for Ashkenazi men to be tested if there's a family history, because first of all, it can be passed on, and you want to find out whether later on you have to tell your own child to do it. And secondly, there's also v'nishmartem od l'nafshosechem, even though it is a very, very small percentage. I think it was something like 25 to 30% by men, but still, it is something that is just a blood test. For men, there's no real issue over here. Once you're married and you have kids, you're not going to go through any surgery in any case. Therefore, there is a recommendation for that. Furthermore, a lady who does know she is a carrier, once she's decided that she has a big enough family, with the permission, not, I wouldn't say permission, with consulting with the halachic figures and sitting it out with her husband and working out everything around it, she has an obligation to take preventive measures and go through prophylactic surgery to make sure that she doesn't get ill. When it comes to shidduchim, there is an obligation on a carrier to tell the person she's going out with, but she should be waiting until the second or third date until things warm up and not say it beforehand, unless she was asked directly. She will ask directly. She has an obligation to answer correctly the question. And obviously, again, this is important. If it's someone that's asking you, and you know, let's say it's a shadchan that doesn't keep his mouth shut, and he might tell other people, you don't have an obligation to give that information. Rather, the thing to do is just say, you know what, let's forget about this and move on in life. And when they ask you why, it's just use the words, it's not matim, it's not fitting, it's not going to work out. You can use many excuses. According to Chofetz Chaim, you can even lie in a situation like that. But you do have the obligation to say, even if the question is not about being a carrier, if the question would have been about whether there's a family history. This obligation is not only on the person himself, but also on the third party. Obviously, I cannot say what would be with doctors or medical staff or people like that. They're not allowed to disclose any information as far as the law is concerned, even though halacha does obligate them when they will ask straight out. That's their question that they have to ask their own rabbi. A person who is a carrier and wants to prevent family members from suffering the same fate that they had should not go through PGT in order to take care of it, unless they are very strong reasons like psychological reasons or other reasons, or she's going anyway through IVF, then you would be allowed to do it. That is, generally speaking, most of what the halacha, what we can say about BRCA. One more thing I think is also very important to add. Most people today, when you talk about genetics, they have no idea of what it means. They don't know what it means to have and they think that when you mention these words, it flies way over their head. And like I've seen it many times, you can speak, you can give over a class, a shir, you can You can speak to people who come to consult you and say, yeah, there's testing like this, testing like that. They don't take you seriously. They don't think it really makes a difference. Since we do know it makes a difference and we do have an obligation, this is something to bring forward and to speak to wherever you can to create the awareness of this issue. And you can save many lives through that. On the other hand, you have to be very careful. People who are invested in BRCA and so on and so forth, for them, it's everything. And sometimes you can paint it in a way that seems that it's way worse than it actually is, as if it's a clear and present danger. It's an immediate something they have to take care of right away, which is not the case. So it always has to be with the right balance. And the more we know about it, and the more we give over to the people who we're consulting, teaching, or involved with, the more they will be informed and they'll be able to take the right steps in order to do that. So that is certainly what it is. And when a person does that, he's mekayim the mitzvah of Hashem Solo, the mitzvah of Hashava Saveda, the mitzvah of Nishmartem Olen Avshaseichem. So certainly this is something a person should do. Thanks again to Sharsheret and to my mother for enabling this to happen. And Mitzvah Shem, we should all see Besoras Tovos and Yeshua and Geula B'mheira.
Amen, amen. Although I do want to say one thing, Rav Steinberg is the one that comes out against BGT, but I know there are other Rabbonim that do permit it, even if they're not going through fertility issues. So look it up.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Shkoyach. Thank you. There was one question here I see in the chat. The Gabe tattoos, would the same psak apply for eyebrows or permanent makeup if women want to go mifchinat tattooing?
So it really very much depends. When we're talking about eyebrows, so for some ladies, that is mamish what's known as kvoda brios. They feel ashamed to walk out in the street with without eyebrows. Situation like that, when someone feels ashamed, feels uncomfortable, you'd be allowed to do it. When it comes to permanent makeup, that's already a completely different story. And there are various opinions in the poskim. Some say that it's not even, doesn't fall under the category of tattooing. It doesn't last for very long. It's not deep enough, and therefore it is mutter. A lot of poskim would hold. It's also Ovadia Yosef clearly, when people asked him, said that he does not recommend it halachically, unless there is a reason. Someone who's, let's say, who's very pale and feels very uncomfortable and putting on makeup every time is very hard for her, and then Shabbos is a problem, and that is a problem. She should ask a local Orthodox rabbi, like they say, and say, listen, I have a real reason to do it. But without a real reason, it's not so simple to be matter it.
Thank you, Rabbanit.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Rav Ari Natano Moore. Thank you. That was not only extremely comprehensive, but also with the sensitivity. And I think that, again, learning both from Rav Moore this week, from Dr. Sharon Grossman last week about prophylactic surgery, and definitely as Rav Moore beautifully presented many of the halachic issues and the issues of sensitivity, predominantly with regard to shidduchim. And this is what really opens up the entire Pandora's box that we want to now bring to communities for many different reasons, some of which we're going to hear right now, and some of which we just heard. Again, both a BRCA screening and certainly even basic awareness, sharing with people whether one is a carrier, what the implications are, what the next steps of treatments are, what may prophylactically be done. And these are all questions that every community and certainly community leaders have to answer, have to contend with. And we're going to now hear from Dr. Sharon Grossman, who will relate to some of the stigmas in communities. And we're going to hear both from her, and then I'll continue thereafter with what we, as community leaders, together with Sharsheret, what we may do to help bring about not just greater awareness of the halachot and of certainly the health concerns, but what we may do sociologically and psychologically and emotionally to help support not only women who are going through these challenges, but for the entire tzibur, for the entire public, for all of really the population, both men and women, to ensure that their health concerns will be a priority. Dr. Sharon Grossman, it's a zchut and honor to have you on again to please introduce these issues.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this. So just one moment, I will share my screen. Okay. So what do we know about attitudes towards BRCA in the Orthodox community? Well, we don't know much. On the one hand, we might assume that the Orthodox community would be very comfortable with BRCA and BRCA testing. After all, we've grappled with Tay-Sachs, which is a genetic mutation. And in fact, Tay-Sachs testing has become de rigueur. Most couples test for genetic diseases before they get married. Most Orthodox couples test for Tay-Sachs. And so we would assume that the same would hold for BRCA. But these two mutations are very different. And the testing is very different. The testing that people have before they get married is typically to determine whether they will have a child that inherits a potentially harmful mutation. So we're testing the parents to determine what their child will have. But when we talk about BRCA testing, we're actually testing the people who might become sick in the future. And some of the other genetic tests that we test for before marriage we don't even, when you do through Dor Yesharim, you don't even know who carries what they carry. It's all very guarded, and you just know it's not a good match. BRCA testing is very different. We're testing the people who will get sick, and we can't not inform them because they need to take steps to reduce those risks. Unfortunately, Orthodox Jews have not been well represented in studies of BRCA testing. But there is a group at the Columbia University School of Public Health, which has spent quite a bit of time on this topic and really has given us a window into what the community is thinking. You know, we have a sense from just being part of the community of what might be going on, but this is really a very rigorous scientific analysis of what's going on. And I'm going to take you on a journey that shows how our thinking has evolved, what we've discovered, what we know today, and try to think together where we can go with this in the future as Rabbaniyot, as women community leaders, as Mizrachi, and as part of Sharsheret. And so in the first iteration of studies that they conducted, they looked at attitudes of predominantly modern Orthodox women, but also Yeshivish and Chabad and Hasidish in the Washington Heights area towards testing. And they found that 75% of the women had not considered testing or would refuse testing. The women who were more likely to test were women who had adequate genetic testing knowledge, had a higher breast cancer risk, and even overestimated that risk. Well, it's great that those women would test. Overestimating risk caused them undue anxiety. And nearly 50% of women had inadequate knowledge of testing, inadequate knowledge of BRCA, which brings home the importance of Sharsheret, the importance of evenings such as this to educate women, to educate the community and overcome these knowledge barriers. Women who wanted to test or were inclined to test would test to prevent developing cancer, to prevent dying, and for their children. And so the researchers hypothesized that maybe there was something going on, something different going on in the Orthodox community, different factors that might interfere with testing, that might be coloring women's perception of BRCA. And so they did another round of studies. And this round involved women also from across the Orthodox spectrum, but predominantly modern Orthodox. This time they are from the 5 towns. They're from Teaneck, Bergen County, Muncie, Passaic, Clifton, New Jersey, Edison, New Jersey, Highland Park. I think that covers all of them. And they had focus groups. And the focus groups revealed that the following factors were deterring women from testing. the concern that the result of testing would impact on marriage and family, that there was a stigma in the Orthodox community about being a carrier, the lack of open discussion in the community, lack of community support, lack of education, and certain religious concerns. And so then they divided the women up into focus groups to hear what they were thinking and what kind of ideas and concerns might interfere with testing. And so in the focus group, one of the women said, if you're dating, then suddenly that has to come up. And suddenly they had someone in their family who struggled with it and died, and it could be a very big deal breaker. The fear in our community is if someone is branded. So now who wants to marry them because they have a 50% chance of passing away early. So we have deal breaker, we have an issue of branding, we have the perception that if you carry the mutation, there's a 50% chance that you're going to die early, which is not the case. There's maybe a 50% chance of developing ovarian cancer or a 50% chance of developing breast cancer, but not a 50% chance of dying. Lack of community support. So again, there's a lot of secrecy. We don't talk about BRCA. Can you imagine going to a Shabbos meal and talking about BRCA with someone? I do now because I have a beautiful Sharsheret challah cover on my table, and anyone who sees it will ask where it comes from. But the average person is not talking about BRCA at the Shabbos table. It's taboo. There's a sense of we're not comfortable talking about it. And in fact, the Orthodox community, we know from studies looking at factors that deter women from undergoing breast cancer screening, going to get mammograms, that there is a tremendous crippling fear of cancer in the Orthodox community. So much so that we can't even call cancer by its proper name. In some circles, we refer to it as the machala. And so that reluctance to talk about it makes people reluctant to go for testing and makes them uncomfortable with testing and makes them uncomfortable with really anything related to cancer. And then finally, there were rabbinic concerns. There were concerns that women wanted input from the rabbanim or rabbaniot to know how halacha approaches testing. How does it approach risk-reducing interventions? In fact, there was a perception that a lot of the offerings the genetic counselor does are totally against the Torah. And this speaks to the importance of what Rav Ari did tonight, of teaching us the halacha, of showing us that halacha obligates testing, certainly in someone who comes from a family, has a first-degree relative who carries a mutation, that it's recommended for people in the general population, the age at which it's recommended, that if they test positive, the halacha would certainly permit them to undergo risk-reducing surgery. There is a general lack of knowledge, and evenings such as this, events such as this, help fill that gap. So, armed with this information, the group from Columbia School of Public Health hypothesized that they needed to try to improve the knowledge among the Orthodox women, understanding of what BRCA is, and perhaps also involve rabbinic leaders. And we'll get to the rabbinic leaders in just a moment. But they set out to create a decision aid. Now, I'm personally very partial to decision aids. My research when I was at Harvard was on decision aids, but decision aids are tools. Back in the day when I was doing it, there was a scripted interview that you have with a woman to help her decide about treatments, going over the risks and benefits to improve her understanding and help her make a decision that reflects her values and her needs. And here they offered women a computerized decision aid to help them to understand BRCA better. So the decision aid helped increase their knowledge, but it didn't change their willingness to get tested. And so the authors hypothesized that they needed to create a decision aid that wasn't just one for the general public. They needed to create something that really reflected the concerns and needs of the Orthodox women, and also that they needed to get endorsement from key stakeholders, rabbanim, rabbaniot, community leaders, for women to embrace testing, for women to be more open to it, for women to make it more acceptable. And so in the next stage of their research, they gathered together Orthodox community stakeholders. They gathered together Rabbanim, Rabbaniyot, Kala teachers, shadchans, health brokers, with doctors and genetic counselors and nurses, and they sat down and they said, what are the deterrents and what can we do to overcome those deterrents? And so one quote, the focus needs to be, because if women are identified with a BRCA mutation, there's a huge opportunity to not only prevent them from being diagnosed with breast cancer, but to also prevent them from dying of breast cancer, which has a huge impact on the other members of the family. And so what they're saying is that our initiatives, the programs that we create to help destigmatize BRCA in the Orthodox community need to emphasize that testing will save lives, not just of the woman who tests positive, but all of her relatives who can then go ahead and get tested and take steps to reduce their risk. These programs also need to emphasize that women can take steps to reduce the risk of cancer, and that halacha permits them, that women can take steps and families can take steps to prevent transmission to children, and halacha permits that too, although not all poskim, as we've heard, endorse it, but there are certainly those who do. That we need to create systems that address disclosure and shidduchim and offer people guidance how to navigate those issues. Not surprisingly, the Orthodox community leaders reported what the women in the focus groups reported, which is that there's tremendous stigma in the Orthodox community, fear of marrying into families which carry the mutation. It keeps women from getting tested. It's important to talk about steps that we can take to manage these risks, that people believe that BRCA will actually break up entire families. And so we need to, and they also go on to say that the community needs education about how to disclose potential information about matches. We need information not just to guide individuals, couples, families on how to manage carrying the mutation when it comes to shidduchim, but also we need community education so that the people that we encounter on shidduchim, so that the other parties understand what BRCA is and are open, are open to a shidduch with someone who carries a mutation because they understand what it means and what it doesn't mean. The Orthodox leaders talked about the importance of collaboration between doctors and Orthodox leaders, that the doctors need to understand what the concerns of their religious patients are, and that the Orthodox community leaders need to also understand what the medical issues are. As Rav Moore emphasized, the importance of including husbands in the dialogue so that husbands understand what their wives are going through. And then, of course, there are practical issues for implementation. Who is going to talk to women in the Orthodox community about getting tested? There aren't enough genetic counselors around. Perhaps Kala teachers should do it. There is a Rav in the New York area who advocates having Kala teachers reach out to brides a year after the birth of their first child to encourage them to go get tested at that time, because at that point in time, they're probably more settled in their lives. But there really needs to be someone who can take this on, who has the time for this. And if they do encourage it, at what stage should this be done? Should it be done, if it's done earlier, then couples can use PGT to prevent the birth of a child that carries the mutation. But if it's done too early, it might interfere with shidduchim. If a woman waits until her 30s, certainly when there's a family history, when she's already married and she's already settled, that might be too late because she's lost out on a lot of years of surveillance. And how do we implement this? How do we talk about it? How do we talk about it amongst each other? How do we talk about it in conferences? How do we talk about it with written materials? Especially there's certain communities where we can't use the word cancer, where we can't use the word breast. One comment that came out from these community leaders is education won't help because emotions are stronger than the mind, which shows that we have some deeply rooted fears about BRCA, deeply rooted fears about cancer, and argue that for our continued perseverance to try and try and try, because even if we don't succeed the first time, eventually we will get there. There was also a comment that Rabbanim have to be educated to help advise patients. Well, I would argue this applies to Rabbaniot, and it also applies to women Orthodox community leaders. And the Orthodox leaders said they wanted the Rabbanim to be educated, to advise patients. They felt in some cases Rabbanim, and again, this applies broadly to women, Orthodox women leaders, that in some cases, when there's a family history, Rabbanim should actually get into someone's face and say, you should be tested. Now, we can argue whether we think that that's the right approach, but there may be certain circumstances where that should be. And they also point out that there's no standard protocol from the Frum community on how to manage these issues. And then finally, there is they suggested that religious leaders can introduce the tools at cultural events. Now, right after I read this study, I happened to listen to Rabbi Bleich speaking at the most recent Chemed Halacha and Medicine conference in New Jersey. I think it was February of last year. And he spoke about BRCA, and he opened his conversation by calling to task the organizers of the event, because when he had agreed to speak, he had asked them to set up a testing booth for BRCA at the event to show that there is nothing shameful about testing, to show that we as the Orthodox community embrace testing, that we encourage it, that it is part of what it is to be a Torah observant Jew, part of fulfilling the mitzvah of V'nishmartem. They didn't listen to him, but he continued to speak, and I hope he perseveres, because the message is a very powerful one. There is nothing to be ashamed of about this. We don't need to go into a back room, down the stairs to a foreign country to get tested. This is we're taking care of ourselves. We're taking care of our own health and our family's health. So, as community leaders, there are a few key messages we need to make sure that we emphasize to the people around us, that BRCA mutations are much more prevalent than people realize, that carrying the mutation does not mean that somebody has cancer. It means merely that they have a higher risk of developing cancer in the future, but that's not certain. People who do not have the BRCA mutation can also get cancer in the absence of the mutation. There are effective interventions to reduce the risk of developing cancer and to detect it at an early, more curable stage. Couples can use PGT to avoid transmitting the mutation to their children. Women can have testing after they're married so that the results will hopefully not interfere with shidduchim. That posts can permit and encourage testing, and they permit and encourage risk-reducing surgery and reconstruction. And all of us carry mutations. It would be a shame to reject someone as a potential shidduch because they carry the mutation, only to find someone else who has a more harmful mutation about which we know much less. And then finally, the Orthodox leaders said that we need to be looking at BRCA from multiple ways. It's not just through the doctor, it's not just through the rabbi or the rabbanit or the women community leader, it's not just through the community education program, but we need to be really creative in thinking about different ways to be approaching the community from different aspects of the community to be spreading this message of awareness. And so as community leaders, we have the opportunity to help both on an individual level and on a communal level. Individually, to counsel women and their families as they go through these decisions, and on a communal level, to think about community events and opportunities for community education. Each one of us comes from a different community, which has different values and different ways of talking about disease and talking about cancer. And each one of us can help to think about how to formulate this in a way that addresses those specific community needs. I think we can also start to think about maybe creating guidelines, protocols of how to address these issues in the frum world, how to address BRCA testing, how to address risk-reducing surgery, how to address PGT, how to address the issue of shidduchim. And just as the Rabbinical Council of America, the OU, Mizrachi released statements about COVID testing, about measles vaccination, we can also create platforms and guidelines for managing BRCA risk. So these are just a few of my very basic thoughts. I hope that that through the last three Wednesday nights together, each of us has the tools both to guide individuals and family on issues related to BRCA and to think together as a community of what we can do to destigmatize BRCA, to normalize the conversation, to open it up to our Shabbos table so that becomes a reality. And through this, may we be zocha, the teaching of Shmot Perak Tetvav Pasuk Kafvav Kol Machala Asher Samti Mitzrayim Lo Asim Alecha Ani Hashem Rafecha.
Wow. Wow. Dr. Grossman, thank you. Really, in milim. That was a perfect survey, both of the anxieties, the stigmas, and what we as community leaders, particularly Torah community leaders, may do from simple acts such as putting a Sharsheret challah cover on our table to encouraging at all different events, at conferences, at certainly in seminaries, and definitely community and cultural events. I have to say that as you said that, the wheel started turning. How can we do this? How can we have a Rosh Chodesh event with perhaps even a glass decorating, but also discussing BRCA testing and screening? And with this, before we have the zchut to hear from Leora speaking about Sharsheret and ways of not only taking advantage of the phenomenal resources that Sharsheret now provides in Eretz Yisrael, I'd like to also just bring some suggestions as to what we can do, not only as Dr. Grossman beautifully explained, the stigmas and how we may somehow mitigate those stigmas in communities, but also some of the concerns that we know, again, people share. So speaking of sharing, I'm going to share right here, again, a little, I guess you can say, not so much survey, but indeed, the concerns and communal sensitivities and certain strategies really for support. So I hope I'm not too redundant. And truth be told, I think the more that communities hear this, the more that we as women, the more that we as Torah leaders, the more that rabbinical personalities can hear and internalize this, then certainly the more may be done. So as we know, genetic testing for BRCA mutations has become, Baruch Hashem, and here is a wonderful opportunity to also thank Dr. Pnina Moore, because she is almost single-handedly, again, responsible for helping to increase the accessibility, particularly in our communities here in Israel, again, to help us understand and screen women. And as such, there is a higher prevalence, as we know, of the certain founder mutations amongst the Ashkenazi populations, which also carry tremendous potential, both for early detection and prevention, but also introduce, as Dr. Grossman explained, complex emotional, halachic, pastoral, and communal considerations. So, and I put together even a handout for those who would like the primary concerns that are raised across diverse Jewish settings and diverse Jewish demographics, offering hopefully some further practical advice, sensitive pathways for education support and awareness. So part one, indeed, some of these central concerns that we've already seen. There are the emotional concerns, worry about discovering the high-risk information. I can just share that, as I'm sure many of you are aware as well, and even when our children are in shidduchim, just to see the anxiety that they go through with regard to the information Again, I have one son who literally is having a hard time. He has to wait a week for his results, and just to see the difficulty of, again, waiting to see what are the implications of this high-risk information, the fear of living under long-term medical surveillance, the concern that health risks may overshadow emotional well-being or my spiritual calm. And certainly, and that's one of the primary reasons why we offered this phenomenal series that will be available, Bezrat Hashem, on the Mizrachi Young Israel website, the misunderstanding of statistics, leading, as we know, sometimes to exaggerated fear or exaggerated paralysis. But then, as we also address the halachic and the ethical considerations, how strongly does Pikuach Nefesh obligate testing in high-risk groups? How should preventative surgeries be evaluated within halachic frameworks? The tension between respecting bodily integrity and actively reducing risk, and the need for individualized rabbinic guidance informed by medical realities, which certainly come up. And the more that we can address this, the better. And here, as we just heard, the stigma and shidduch sensitivities, the anxiety that BRCA status may influence shidduch considerations, the fear of communal labeling or the reduction of a woman's identity to genetic risk, the pressure to maintain privacy while navigating significant health decisions. I truly enjoyed when Rav Moore suggested that there are certain people whom we know may take information and just spread it in communities, and we have to be careful. And there's certainly both internal and external pressure with regard to privacy, and obviously concern for the proper and respectful handling of information within the small and interconnected Jewish communities. And obviously, who is going to know the results? And who do I tell? My children? All my siblings? How do I protect sensitive medical information in communal settings? And each woman, and I can share with you personally that I remember, again, at the night that I found out that I had cancer, and I had to make a decision. Do I share this with people? Do I not share this with people? And my first thought as a religious person was the more people who can daven for me, the better. And yet speaking to many, many women, and many felt no. Again, we don't want people to know. We want to just keep this within the family. We don't want it affecting not just shidduchim, but even we don't want parents to be concerned over us. So here, in fact, how do we ensure some level of privacy? Who do we share these results with? How do we protect the sensitive medical information in communal settings? There are concerns abroad regarding insurance or future employment even. The worry about certainly gossip, rechilot, again, misinterpretations in the tight-knit environment. And then come the theological questions. Does genetic awareness undermine trust in divine protection? We heard tonight that various halachic piskei halacha, again, are ultimately influenced by one's level of emuna. If you have a sufficient emuna, then maybe you wouldn't go for further testing. How do we balance hishtadlut, responsible action, and spiritual serenity together with bitachon and emuna, and concerns that genetic data may actually feel overly deterministic? Is this what maybe God wants me just to, again, to have this gene, carry this gene? Maybe I'm supposed to contract the disease, whatever Hashem wants ultimately is going to happen. So these are very common theological questions that arise as well. And then there are the premarital and preconception questions that we addressed. How BRCA differs from recessive screening, and that difficulty of knowing when and how to disclose information, the concerns about fertility, timing, pregnancy decisions, PGT, long-term planning, and the gendered and life stage pressures that Dr. Grossman related to as well. Women hear most of the emotional, reproductive, and medical burdens. They carry a lot of this anxiety regarding surgical options and their implications for body image and motherhood. And there's sometimes, especially from the doctors and the surgeons, the pressure to act quickly without adequate emotional processing. And therefore, as already mentioned, it is essential that we bring others into this picture. Certainly, husbands, again, and ideally, the more communal support we have, the better. Not every community, though, has access to genetic counseling, to clear medical information, or halachic guidance. And we hope that this series has at least provided some measure of making this information a little more accessible to everyone. The variation also in Hebrew English literacy when accessing resources. This was meant specifically for women Torah leaders in Olim communities, because I cannot tell you how many women sit in the Shaarei Tzedek or the Hadassah in Karim or the Ichalav, again, waiting room in the breast cancer department on the oncology floor, and they see the Achat Mitesha, which is now really Achat Mishmona or Sheva, and they see the Melev Alev, they see all the various pamphlets, but they're all in Hebrew. The need for community leaders to bridge both educational and also the language gaps. And now, in the brief time that we have, part 2. Just as Dr. Grossman expressed as well, what are some of the recommendations for the education, the awareness, and really the compassionate, and by this I mean both emotional, psychological, and halachic support. So number 1, as already mentioned, to strengthen that communal literacy, to offer balanced shiurim. And Dr. Grossman and I went around to different communities for a while, and I want to thank you, Sharon, for continuing to go around to communities. And I know that Dr. Penina Moore does this as well, to offer balanced shiurim. Very often, again, we have to ask ourselves, what is the hook, right? For us to advertise, okay, we're offering an evening of BRCA literacy. That's not necessarily, I hate to say it, the most exciting event, again, of the week. And especially when the community calendar is also offering, flower arrangements or a Rosh Chodesh event with a phenomenal guest speaker, or maybe, again, a book club that you're not going to miss that night. Somehow we have to think of better hooks. Again, sometimes it really is a shiur, to invite everyone to a shiur and then link that to contemporary medicine, Torah values. The shiur isn't about bracha, and it may not even be about breast cancer. Maybe it's just about women's health. And then that's the means through which we can incorporate, again, the medicinal information together with the Torah values. Also combining medical expertise with halachic and pastoral guidance, already mentioned. That means that every Kala teacher, that means that every Chatan teacher, that means that every seminary teacher should be certainly familiar with the halachic issues. Rav Moore also mentioned that means that Rabbanim, whom he said very often don't have the medical expertise, if they're in a halachic position in communities, then they need to combine, again, their halachic knowledge with the medical expertise as well. Sometimes it's just a matter of even providing written, again, questions and answers, again, the basic facts that summarize halachic considerations, emotional resources, and have Sharsheret's number all over the place, not just in mikvaot, but really to place them again on school boards, in restrooms, normalize education through annual health awareness programming. And obviously, we have to take into account, as both Dr. Grossman and as Rav Moore suggested, tailoring approaches for different Jewish communities, whether it's modern Orthodox, Dati, Lumi, and this isn't the time or place to mention the difference between them, but integrating sessions into women's learning programs, seminary curricula, use a Torah-driven framework, again, stewardship of health, generational responsibility, have mother-daughter days, maybe Yud Aleph Cheshvan, maybe at the Yartzeit of Rachel Imenu, the perfect time to talk about taking care of one's health, how one can make sure and really to protect and to preserve and to ensure health, awareness, vitality. Certainly to have days of Emunah, maybe Asara B'Tevet, the perfect time to talk about the balance between Hishtadlut and Emunah, and use issues of women's health, use BRCA screening as the perfect example. In Haredi communities, this often means being much more discreet, again, modestly framing, perhaps small group discussions, and not, advertising communal or national days. Bring rabbinic leaders, definitely to bring rabbanim, such as Rav Moore, into the conversation as early as possible to establish trust, provide confidential pathways, whether they be hotlines, again, but certainly for women within the communities to be there, again, help them with regard to testing and counseling. Even, again, in a Masarati, reform, teaching through values sometimes. And it's interesting, as Dr. Grossman said, different demographics, we find different levels of sensitivity and also different levels of education, obviously including that this is actually a wonderful means of inspiring communities and telling them this isn't just a medical concern. This really is a pastoral, a religious concern. Strength in general medical literacy and access to professional resources, but also it's an opportunity to inspire less less affiliated communities, also with Torah values. So addressing the needs of different demographics is always a challenge, and one of the challenges that we hope that through this forum, whereas there are so many women across the demographics in Israel in particular, again, to be able to access all of them, whether they're adolescents and seminary students, to deliver calm and factual introductions, not to, I see sometimes the information is relayed in a way in which it only breeds greater anxiety. So to make sure that the presenters know how to deliver factual introductions in a calm manner, again, how to teach preventative health, again, in an empowering manner, providing private avenues for questions. And there should be in every school, every high school, every seminary, and women whom these young women can turn to, because we know that there are women who even below the age of 20 already know that in fact they have breast cancer in the family, that their mother is a carrier, their older sisters are carriers. For singles, making sure that there are trusted mentors, Rebbitzins, Yoatzot Halacha, Hala teachers who understand Shidduch sensitivities, teach language. And as an educator, I find that this is one of the most essential tools to teach proper language. Each one of our speakers over the course of the past 3 weeks has been so professional with regard to proper usage of terms to make sure that we understand what these words mean. And sometimes we use so many different abbreviations that they don't even know what BRCA stands for or PGT. Teach language and teach proper language for navigating disclosure with dignity. And that's really the definition of tzniut. For married women and mothers to provide support groups focused on navigating kupot cholim, especially in Olim communities, people don't know what's available to them. People don't know what's funded. Each kupa providing different services, international insurance. Again, what happens with people go back and forth. They go to summer camps during the summer months. Again, ongoing testing, offer guidance for speaking with children about family history and teaching them in general just about both health issues and, once again, the idea of tzniut, of privacy. And how about survivors and BRCA carriers? Connect them with professional mental health support peer circles, which I do want to speak about right before Leora gets on, and medical navigators offer ongoing pastoral support framed with compassion and strength, and certainly to reduce the stigma and normalize conversations through encouraging calm, factual language rather than alarmist messaging, reassuring women that their identity is far richer than their genetic risk. They are much more than BRCA carriers. Emphasize that many carriers live long, healthy lives with proper care, model respectable, confidential listening within these circles of leadership. And that's why we have to build partnerships between Torah, medicine, and mental health. Establishing clear referral pathways to genetic counselors, physicians, and therapists, and definitely Torah leaders, encouraging women to consult halachic authorities only after receiving accurate medical information, and fostering collaborative programs where rabbanim, yoatzot, medical experts, and educators work together. And this is where the critical role of Sharsheret is indispensable. And this is where, Leora, I hope it's okay if right before you speak, I just share my personal story that I asked Penina if it's okay if I share on this third and final of our series. And that is that during the summer, and this goes back 12 years, exactly 12 years from now. And Mamash, I'll tell you why it's exactly 12 years. I was going to my husband and I teach in Camp Moshava. And this was a time when they didn't have the beautiful mikvah that they have today in Camp Moshava. And I was going to the mikvah, and it was in the lake. So it was very dark there. All we had were flashlights to use for the iyun process of checking oneself before going into the lake. And as I'm checking myself literally in the dark, iyun, as our great-great-grandmothers used to do, again, literally checking head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And we always, right, we're taught, and as women, that this is the best time to check our breasts. So it became a habit, which I encourage every single woman to do. This is the most wonderful time to, as you're performing halachic iyun, to check, try to see if there's any abnormal lump. And sure enough, I felt something on my left breast. And I kept touching it, and I tried in the dark to almost like peel it off because I had never felt it before. And there was a lump. And I thought initially on my breast, in my breast. And the balanit, who was a good friend, said, Shani, is everything okay? I said, yeah, there's just something. I'm trying to get it off, but it's not coming off. And the halacha then is, if you can't get it off, it must be part of your body. So I went to the lake, and then I came back to our bunk, and albeit the lighting wasn't so great, but in fact, I felt a lump. And Baruch Hashem also had a phenomenal friend who was a doctor who said, on one hand, I don't want to alarm you. Again, I consulted with her. She said, I had just finished breastfeeding about a year earlier, and she had said, maybe it's just the result of breastfeeding, but you really should get it checked out. So I had made an appointment for, again, just a regular breast exam with the local Maccabi doctor, and for the day that I would land. And sure enough, I went, and I was the last patient the night that I landed. And he said right away, you have to go to Dr. Strano. and already, again, mamash, within the week, I had known that not only with the biopsy results came back very quickly. They called me in. And yes, in fact, it was breast cancer. At that day, and literally, when you think about Hashgachat Hashem, that same day, when I found out, they called my husband in, and my husband was sitting in Yeshivat HaKotel, meeting with none other than Rachi Shoretz, the founder of Sharsheret. And she had come with her younger son to survey certain different yeshivot that her son would perhaps be interested in attending the following year. And my husband didn't know what to say. He didn't know who she was, but he said, I'm sorry, I have to leave to go join my wife in the hospital. And it just came out. He said it came out. He doesn't know why it came out. It says she was just diagnosed with breast cancer. And Rachi Shoret, sitting there, said, I don't know if you know this, but I founded Sharsheret, and everyone knows Sharsheret. I founded Sharsheret, and if she needs anything, literally anything, I'm here. That was my first exposure on a personal level to Sharsheret. And the perhaps most beautiful part of the story is that the very next day on my husband's desk in yeshiva, Rachi had placed a full, I guess she travels the world with him. She had traveled the world with him, Zachronah Livracha, an entire loose leaf full of all the information that I would possibly need. Again, everything in English, and with a handwritten note that I have till today. Shani, if you need anything, just call. And I never did call, but rather gave shiurim l'zachra. But perhaps the most beautiful part was that at the top of the folder, and she had placed, and I believe that every woman from Sharsheret receives this, there was a package of thank you notes. And on the package of thank you notes, it says, and as you go through your journey, and we hope that you'll be able to use these as well. And in fact, I used each one of those thank you notes to thank all the malachim, all the angels along the way. And albeit I had just wonderful family support, in Israel, I felt that there really wasn't much support. And albeit I had known a few friends here and there, but when it came to even the medical information, should I undergo after hearing that after the lumpectomy, that there was still DCIS material, and now I had a choice, should I continue with radiation? Baruch Hashem, the oncotype was low, but should it be radiation or should I have a unilateral, maybe a bilateral mastectomy? And the oncologist who basically sent me to, again, all different doctors going around. Finally, my brother-in-law, a radiologist, suggested, Shani, maybe just call Sharsheret. And that's exactly what I did. And it was remarkable how Sharsheret matched me also with someone in my exact circumstance, someone with 6 children, again, young children, someone with a very similar medical diagnosis, someone who told me something that no one else told me, which was that after the mastectomy, you're going to have tubes going out from your underarms and they're going to be very painful. And without even that support and information, and albeit in Israel, there are different organizations, there's no one who holds your hand like Sharsheret. And from that moment, I was really on a campaign to bring Sharsheret to Israel. And I want to say, Shachianu v'kimanu v'gianu lazman hazeh. Sharsheret is indispensable because the organization provides confidential, culturally attuned support to Jewish women, offering medical navigation, guidance, genetic counseling, pathways, resource-rich education, understanding the halachic sensitivities, the communal anxieties around privacy, modesty, shidduchim. It maintains peer support networks linking women with shared experiences. It provides evenings such as what we've had, and in order to educate women. And therefore, how as leaders, as Torah leaders, can we engage Sharsheret? How can we take advantage of the fact that now they're in Israel helping us and holding our hands every step along the way? We can invite them. We can have evenings such as these to teach in shuls, in seminaries, women's Rosh Chodesh groups. And that's why I say exactly 12 years ago to Mamash this day, my unilateral mastectomy was on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. So we can share their resource guides and helpline discreetly with community members. We can partner on awareness campaigns tailored to Israeli, or if you know also diaspora populations. Encourage those struggling with fear or information overload to contact Sharsheret for guidance, as Leo, I'm sure, will tell us. And therefore, I want to end with, again, a little bit of a Torah inspiration as well. We began by speaking about the halachic implications of V'nishmartem ma'od lenafshotechem. We're commanded, mida oraita, to guard our well-being with vigilance and love. And this mitzvah doesn't diminish trust in Hashem. It expresses it. Hishtadlut is the practical language of faith in a world shaped by divine wisdom and human responsibility. This week's parsha, we know Rivka seeks clarity during her pregnancy. Batelech lidrosh et Hashem. She goes to seek guidance. Her model is profoundly relevant. What more do we need to recognize that we confront uncertainty not with fear, but with inquiry, with clarity, with the yearning for truth, with seeking out medical and halachic guidance. BRCA awareness asks our communities to cultivate the same posture of courage and inquiry as we see the Torah encourages. Chazal teach us that all knowledge, all chachma, medical knowledge in particular, is a divine gift entrusted to us so that we may protect ourselves and one another. Empowering women with understanding, compassion, and support transforms potentially frightening information into a source of agency and resilience. And therefore, we hope that this series has not only provided you with this divine gift, but really provided you then with the skills, with the information, with the resources that you can bring into your community to strengthen both in Torah and in health the members of your community, your friends, and your family for now and for the future. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Leora Tannenbaum, whose story we heard a little bit of last week, who is going to share with us some of the resources that Baruch Hashem are now available here in Israel and how we, as Torah leaders in our communities, can bring this into each one of our own environments. Leora.
Thank you. Honestly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Leora Tannenbaum. I'm the director of the Regional Israel office of Sharsheret. But to be honest, having listened to each of you tonight, I think I just feel so grateful to be in any position that keeps me in the company of such incredible women and rabbinic authorities here who, by extension, I know the families and I know the leaders that we're hearing from tonight. And if this is the company that I've been allowed to keep through the role that I'm working on here in Israel, then I'm truly humbled and truly grateful. So as you know, everybody's touched on so much already tonight. So I'll really just speak on a more specific, I guess, scope that Sharsheret is now here in Israel officially. Thank God. We'll be coming up on our second year, the end of December. As we've heard in different parts of the talks, and I'm sure over the last few weeks, we offer one-on-one peer support. We offer one-on-one emotional support. We have support groups that we've been running. All of the services that we offer are free of charge. They're all confidential. We offer genetic support in a way that we are able, in so many ways of what everyone's touched on, I think, certainly tonight, support, among families. When you talk about genetics, usually it's impacting not just the person who might be the one reaching out, but there are other people in the picture. So we're able to help with navigating that as well as navigating the system here. Something that's been touched on many times. I've been living in Israel, 18 years at this point, and while I feel fairly confident in my Hebrew and in my feeling at home here, when a challenge comes your way, sometimes really what you want is feeling a little bit more of that support, of that encouragement, of a vocabulary that you wouldn't know otherwise. So having someone who can help you again in your mother tongue can be really, really, a lifeline in a way at a time where, you can't necessarily plan for these things. So when it comes up, to know that there's a number, there's a place, there's an email that you can call, that you can reach out to, we're here. And I think, I feel very strongly that so much of what we do and so much of what we're a part of as part of the Sharsheret community is that we were informed by the people that so much of this is impacting, in the breast and ovarian cancer scope as well as the genetics. So it's having this tremendous network of women and families, and men who we've spoken to who have helped us realize what should go in a surgery kit so that we can send out the best possible kit for someone going in for a mastectomy or who's in the midst of treatment. What kind of resources are the most helpful resources to get? I say often, like, lahavdil, when you are about to have a baby, I feel like all your girlfriends or family members tell you what to pack in your bag, but your doctor's not necessarily going to tell you what to pack in your bag before you go in for a mastectomy or a lumpectomy. And that's where, all those pieces in between is where we can come in and help. And one of the things that, I find that is so clear to me, the more that I spend time in speaking to different people here, and part of this, again, this really empowering community that Sharsheret has built and continues to grow, is really what the name is. It's a chain, and each one of us, I think it's very clear to me tonight, all the more so, each one of us is a piece, is a link. And the more we can find ways to add to that chain and to link with each other and to take the stigma out of the conversation, to normalize the conversation, to get the education, to come at it from a place of being empowered, wherever our starting point is, then we're just making the change stronger. So, I feel so grateful I'm continuously enriched by being able to be a part of this, network, and to be in this position now and to be a part of such an incredible group of people. And, both with Dr. Panina Moore and Dr. Sharon Grossman, who, again, is also a neighbor, but someone who I've had the good fortune to know for many years prior to my involvement per se in Sharsheret, but I connected to Sharsheret as many people have their own personal story right before I made Aliyah, a little over 18 years ago, when I myself was getting ready to move, and actually ended up going for genetic testing for my own family reasons and found out that I'm a BRCA carrier. And the only place I knew I could turn to was Sharsheret. I still moved to Israel and still used whatever resources I could find that were helpful in the States. But it was the only name at the time that I knew. And to be able to be a part of that now and seeing not just how it's grown, but being a part of seeing it grow here in Israel, and how these events, these community events, these educational events can be ones that are super specific, as Rabbanit Shani Tarragon said, like they can be, specific to the topic, or they can just be a really beautiful event of bringing people together that has the added tochen of, you know, here's a little something to keep in mind about your health, or if you have a family history, getting a little bit of that information in. And it's amazing that we see that once those flyers go out for an event, or after an event, when that first person reaches out, maybe they didn't even come to the event, but a friend of theirs did and repeats it to them, and then that person reaches out. That's the chain, and that's how it works. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Our information, I believe, is in the chat box. Both myself and Panina and Dina are here to be of help however we can. And we should just continue to come together to strengthen that chain of support and education, for ourselves, our families, and our communities. So thank you very much.
And thank all of you. We said that we were going to leave time at the end. We have 10 minutes. And I know that for those who have joined live, and you've been on for a while, and Yasher Kochachen. So if you'd like to take advantage and ask questions, you have the leading experts really in the medical field and Baruch Hashem, and in the halachic field as well, and the founder and director of Sharsheret in Israel here. So I urge you to take advantage of this forum if anyone has any questions, and either to place in the chat box or to ask personally now. I see that Harav Ari Moore is on for anyone who has further halacha questions. Okay, this then is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to once again thank Dr. Penina Moore, to thank Harava Arina Tunnel Moore, to thank Dr. Sharon Golfer Grossman, to thank Leora Tannenbaum for not only contributing, but for organizing this event, for your wealth of information, for Dina and for Sarah for beautifully moderating and taking care of all the logistic and technical aspects behind the scenes. So thank you for this phenomenal series that hopefully will change women's lives, that will change the lives of and really the entire dynamic, Torah dynamic, health dynamic of our communities here in Eretz Yisrael. We urge every single woman who watches this, and I know that there are many of you who ask to listen to these recordings, to take the ideas, and certainly to take advantage of the resources that Sharsheret offers, in addition to bringing Sharsheret to your own communities for you, and as Torah leaders, to make sure that you share this information with others, and that Sharsheret is now, Baruch Hashem, and provides for a wealth of resources. Again, it will make sure as well that in addition to these videos that will be present on the website, and it will be sent out to the various WhatsApp forum as well, to make sure that you really do reach out, invite Sharsheret to come to your communities, and make sure that mamash b'siyata d'shmaya, that we all not only stay healthy, but that we also provide the opportunity for v'nishmartem ma'od l'nafshotechem and v'telech l'drosh et Hashem, and be'ezrat Hashem we will see the brachot of our investments as well. B'bracha l'refuah v'takarat tov again to Sharsheret and to all its members, and to all those who participated live. Mamash toda rabba, Shabbat shalom, and Chodesh Tov.
Yeshua.
To you. Mamash, you are all so wonderful.